Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 375, or episode 10 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. This is our inaugural Do Not Be Hasty Mathoms episode. Greta, can you fathom what a Mathom is?
Ooh. Can I fathom what a Mathom is?
That's right. That's what I asked.
I like the rhyme.
Thank you.
You're welcome. A Mathom. I can't fathom what a Mathom is. I've never heard the term before, actually.
Well, I have good news. You're at an orientation.
Oh, no way!
I will tell you shortly what a Mathom is.
But not right now.
So, yeah. Oh. By the way, comment below if you know what that was, what I just made reference to. So
I know what you made reference to.
But don't tell him.
I'm not going to tell him. I'm not.
Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Nice. Very nice. It never gets old saluting our fellowship with a double up air five.
Never.
So, because they're amazing.
It gives us an opportunity to perfect our double up air five.
Mm-hmm. This is a very important thing. Everybody should take time in their life to double up to perfect the double up air five.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we make it look easy, I think, because we've done it so much, but it's never going to be perfect.
We kind of invented it, you know.
We kind of did invent it, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but it's always good to practice.
Yeah. It's the phenomenon that has taken the world by storm. Everyone in every land. It's kind of like the Macarena, right?
Yeah.
Or the walk like an Egyptian.
But you don't need as much coordination, so it's even better.
Yeah.
Macarena, I'm not coordinated enough.
You're a lot better at it than I am. All right, we better move on before people are like, stop talking about random stuff. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R, KG, Melkor27, SaberSystems, and Jeremy D. Which a big thank you to our newest patron, Jeremy D. Shout out to you and thank you for supporting us at the top level, becoming an executive producer, supporting us at the Gandalf level.
Wow!
Thank you, Jeremy
yes,
D.
thank you.
Really appreciate you
very much.
Also, want to give a shout out to Seb M, who renewed his pledge. So thank you, Seb, for renewing your annual pledge.
Yeah.
And a shout out to Willbo Baggins for boosting his pledge. So
Willbo
Baggins.
That's awesome. Thank you, Willbo.
Thank you, Willbo. Appreciate you.
Yes.
As we do all of our fellowship, and speaking of that, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in May of 2024. Michael W., SaberSystems, and Malcolm C. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you.
We do. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, in this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we undertake our inaugural Mathoms episode as we explore heretofore neglected matters, great and small, from the Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 1, A Long Expected Party. So, let's get this out of the way. What is a Mathom? What is a Mathom? All right. So, this is a Tolkien thing, and this is actually a Lord of the Rings thing. And it comes from the prologue of the Lord of the Rings, which we haven't really done in the Do Not Be Hasty, Do Not Be Hasty arc yet. We will probably cover that in some form or fashion. I've got some thoughts on how I'm going to cover that, but we can reference it, as we go along. And so the Mathom idea comes from the prologue, and I'll read this passage here. Though there was still some store of weapons in the Shire, these were used mostly as trophies, hanging above hearths or on walls, or gathered into the museum at Michel Delving. I always feel like I say that wrong. The Mathom House it was called. For anything that hobbits had no immediate use for, but were unwilling to throw away, they called a Mathom. Oh. Their dwellings were apt to become rather crowded with Mathoms, and many of the presents that passed from hand to hand were of that sort. So that's the whole idea, and these Mathoms episodes, we're going to do these after we complete a run of episodes through a particular chapter, just to kind of cover any ground that I didn't really, cover in the episodes themselves, but I felt like I couldn't just leave behind completely. So that's the idea here, and as we go along, there's going to be a lot of stuff like that, because that's one of the beautiful things about Lord of the Rings is there's so much. So many little interesting things to dig into. Just a quick follow-up on that notion. So here we have Tolkien Gateway. Shout out Tolkien Gateway. Very amazing resource that I use quite often. Mathom is a word invented by Tolkien, constructed from an obsolete Old English word, mathom, treasure, precious thing. it is used as a rendering of the original Hobbitish word cast. So just kind of multiple layers kind of you can go into there with that. So anyway, that is the
That's very interesting.
etymology there. So the Old English word. Yeah. All right.
I feel like we probably have a lot of Mathoms in our home.
Well, I was thinking about that. Probably many of you out there are like us in that regard, right? Where you have all these things that you probably haven't touched in years in your home, but you just can't seem to like bring yourself to get rid of them.
For various reasons.
Yeah. And some of us are probably do that more than others, right? Are more prone to that than others. I've tried to become better at just getting rid of things, but if you were to look around even my studio right here, there are like things that I'm just like, why really do I still have this?
Yeah.
But you just kind of can't bring yourself to get rid of it. A lot of times for me, it's like, oh, maybe I could sell this at some point, but then you have to go through the whole process of posting it on eBay or something like that. So I probably just need to get better at like getting rid of things. I feel like I am getting better as I get older.
I think you are.
I remember a few years ago, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, but going through my grandparents' home, and their children having to do that, as my mom and her sisters having to do that, go through, the home that they had lived in for, 60 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And there was so much stuff. There was so much stuff. And a lot of it, there was some good stuff in there, but, a lot of it probably just, it was like this, no one really wants this. So it's kind of trash at this point. But there's, it's hard. I understand there's lots of heirlooms and everything. So anyway, we're trying to get to the good stuff. We're trying to get to the good Mathoms with this episode. So that's the idea.
Yep. I think that's good.
Well, one of the things we'll definitely look at with these Mathoms episodes is we'll reference the different books in the History of Middle-earth series that pertain to Lord of the Rings and the writing of Lord of the Rings. In the case of A Long Expected Party, that means Volume 6, which is Return of the Shadow. So let's talk about some interesting things that are contained in Return of the Shadow. A little background on Return of the Shadow. So basically, again, the History of Middle-earth, we've talked about it before on the Tolkien Road, but the History of Middle-earth is a 12-volume series that goes into different aspects of how Tolkien created the mythology, the legendarium over the course of his life. The first 5 volumes deal with the early stages of writing, like the Silmarillion and everything like that. And then 6 through 9 are about the history of the Lord of the Rings. And so with Return of the Shadow, we're going to look at some interesting things that pertain to the really early on, when Tolkien was just sitting down okay, I'm going to write a sequel to The Hobbit. How is this going to happen? Right. So from the history, and all this, of course, was compiled by Christopher Tolkien after his father had passed away. And Christopher, Christopher had a lot of things, kind of commentary that added value to this process as well. And he says the writing of Lord of the Rings, especially the early chapters, is pretty convoluted, right? Let's just go right to what he said in this regard. So this is from the foreword to Return of the Shadow. Briefly, this is Christopher speaking. Briefly, the writing proceeded in a series of waves, or as I have called them in this book, phases. The first chapter was itself reconstituted 3 times before the hobbits ever left Hobbiton, but the story then went all the way to Rivendell before the impulse failed. My father then started again from the beginning, the second phase, and then again the third phase, and as new narrative elements and new names and relations among the characters appeared, they were written into previous drafts at different times. Parts of a text were taken out and used elsewhere. Alternative versions were incorporated into the same manuscript so that the story could be read in more than one way according to the directions given. To determine the sequence of these exceedingly complex movements with demonstrable correctness at all points is scarcely possible. So essentially, to summarize that, Tolkien, when he was first writing this sequel to The Hobbit, that would eventually, after a long time, become The Lord of the Rings, he kind of started out with, here's another story about Bilbo, and he wrote a beginning to that somewhat kind of resembles A Long Expected Party, and then he wrote a revision of that, kind of started again from the beginning, made some changes, and then he started again from the beginning and made some more changes. And then he finally, on a fourth time kind of proceeded along a little further, and the story was kind of like they're going, okay, Bilbo disappears, and then he has this nephew who who goes to Rivendell with some friends, and there was no kind of like real like deep conflict, I guess you could say. There's driving. It's just like they're going to go on a little walk, they're going to go journey to Rivendell, right? And some interesting stuff will happen along the way. And then he writes like this journey all the way to Rivendell, and then he decides, I need to rework this all, and he kind of goes back to the beginning, and he starts working in the ring stuff a whole lot more. Okay, so that's how things really proceeded over the early course of the composition of Lord of the Rings. Does that kind of make sense to you,
so.
Greta?
Yeah,
it's very convoluted. Like
yeah.
Even Christopher is like, really, I'm just doing my best to piece together what I think happened, because all of these different manuscripts, my father's papers, he was not good about organizing them, and it's all very convoluted. But he says a long expected party represents an extreme case, 6 main texts, and a number of abandoned openings. So this one chapter alone could be compiled, like a whole book could be compiled on this one chapter alone, according to Christopher.
Wow.
Like in terms of like the textual history of it, right? As a study, and there's probably people who'd be interested in that. I mean, I'd probably own a copy. I don't know if I'd ever read it, but I'd own a copy of it just to have it, right? Because it's a very important chapter, right? It gave us the Lord of the Rings. If without this one chapter, this opening chapter, and Tolkien wrestling with this over a long period of time, we would have never had Lord of the Rings in its entirety.
Yeah, and you can make the argument too that the first chapter, I mean, it really kind of sets the tone, and it sets the trajectory for the rest of the tale, right? So like, you've got to make sure and get that right.
Yep.
So
yeah,
hats off to Tolkien for taking his time and making sure it was just the way he wanted it.
Well,
and
it should be. It strikes me a little bit that this is kind of like, when you think about like I'm a big music guy, and like when I think about like artists who have had like finally get that big hit, right? And they kind of like, they're like, I have a hit, right? And the pressure is on to to follow it up with something as good or even better, right? And that's a really daunting process, and lots of artists like crash and burn when it comes to that, right? They take a while to get to that follow up, and do something that they feel like is worthy or pushes beyond it. And a lot of times that makes or breaks kind of like what the really big name, like kind of lasting artists are, and the ones who are just kind of one-hit wonders, right?
Yeah.
So
for sure.
This is kind of the turning point for Tolkien here. Was he going to be a one-hit wonder with The Hobbit, or was he going to be the J.R.R. Tolkien that we all know and is kind of a household name in so many parts of the world today?
Right. Yeah. This was something that people have been asking for a while, right? Like, they've been wanting a sequel for years, right?
They did want a sequel, but I mean, this is really pretty quick after The Hobbit had been published, right? Because The Hobbit was kind of an overnight success, right? And so Tolkien was like, great, maybe I can finally get the Silmarillion published. And they're like, he understood, like, not so much. They kind of want more stories about hobbits. But it's kind of the cool story that Tolkien took that notion that they wanted a sequel to The Hobbit. It's like, can you just tell us another story about the hobbits? They're so cute and funny, right? And he was like, sure, I'll tell you another story about the hobbits. And along the way, I'm going to work in all of the stuff about, like, that bring in the wider world of the Silmarillion, of this legendary that I've created, and embed it in the sequel, right? So I'm going to give you really kind of both, right? So, pretty interesting little twist, that Tolkien did there. And it's a win for, artists, I think, right? It's a win for the artistic and those who are driven to, artistic excellence, because at the end of the day, like, Tolkien could have just settled and been like, sure, I'll give you another fun story about Bilbo. And he would have been kind of like, here it is, whatever, I'll make some more money doing this. But he took a chance, he took his time, and he took a chance, right? And in the end, it paid off, right? He became a legend himself, right?
And the bar had been set really high with The Hobbit, right? Like you said, being basically an overnight success. So, I mean, just, kind of trying to at least, have another success, but maybe even ideally even surpass the success. Like, that's a lot of pressure.
Well, I think about, like some of my favorite musical artists. So I'll say as an example, like U2 or Radiohead, right? U2 in 1986 puts out the Joshua Tree, and it's a massive hit, right? Everybody knows like 3 or 4 songs from that album, right? At least probably 3 songs. There's 3 songs from that album that are like just radio standards in probably a lot of the countries that listen to this podcast. Certainly the U.S. and probably the U.K. as well. And what did they do? Well, for their next full studio album, they took their time and they went and they didn't give you the Joshua Tree Part 2. They gave you Octane Baby, which was like a complete remaking of who they were, right? And it was a real risk. Like they could have very easily just crashed and burned after that, but it ended up becoming, for me, it's my favorite of their records. And for many fans, it's kind of a similar story, and it's kind of considered for many people to be on par, maybe even better than the Joshua Tree. And so, I think of like Radiohead too. I was a big fan of them with the Bends, and then like they were big in the U.S. with Creep, which was kind of their one-hit wonder in the U.S. And then for their third album, they did this thing called OK Computer, which was very it didn't sound like their previous stuff at all. But it has become, similar to kind of what happened with U2. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times musical artists will do this. They'll kind of push the boundaries once they achieve success instead of kind of resting on their laurels and giving you the easy kind of, here's the thing that sounds just like our last song.
Right.
That was a big hit, right?
Yeah.
No, we're going to give you something that we want to do this time, and we challenge you to like it, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't always pay off, but it's cool when it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's like they kind of give you something a little bit more like mainstream or palatable, right? To kind of like prime the pump a little bit, right? Like get their name out there. And then once they're really well known, you're like, oh, okay, people will pay attention now, and maybe, we can do something a little different.
Yeah.
So
I would even say one of your favorite bands, and a band I really like too, kind of does this. You may not know it as much, like kind of recognize it, but I bet you kind of do when you think about it. Like Vampire Weekend, right? With their first record, was very like sort of, direct, kind of more fun, like direct, catchy, kind of almost like pop punk kind of music in a lot of ways. And by the time their third and fourth records rolled around, they kind of really like expanded their artistic palette and were doing a whole lot more with their sound, and like even like kind of like strange things, and like thematically they were doing really surprising things. So even then, like you were telling me, like their latest album is like you love it so much, right?
I love it,
and it's really interesting to me because it's very, in a lot of ways, it's very experimental, and you usually don't go for like experimental music.
I don't, but I think that's kind of genius, because like maybe I'm like kind of the poster child for this kind of thing, because like give me something really like palatable and easy to like, right? And then just gradually push the boundaries a little bit, and it's in a way like preparing you for that more like experimental, like, not as mainstream kind of stuff.
That's a great point, and maybe that's why the Lord of the Rings was such a success in the end, because he kind of starts out in the very familiar world of the Shire, and with these kind of funny stories about hobbits, and he's like, sure, you want more funny stories about hobbits? Here you go.
Yeah.
And he kind of gradually expands, until by the time you get to the Two Towers, you're in this whole other realm of like the hobbits are still there, but you're dealing with all of these other realities within it, right?
Yeah.
And it's just become something altogether different from what The Hobbit was.
It's almost like the positive version of like when you talk about like a frog like boiling, like if you put a frog like in water, and then you just gradually turn up the temperature, right? Like you don't even notice that it's getting hotter because it's it's so gradual. Like it's almost like the positive.
Yeah.
Like that's like kind of a negative analogy, but what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah.
Like it's just like those gradual changes, and like, it's just kind of making it a little bit, and by the time you're there, you're like, whoa, what happened? But in a good way.
We, of course, are not advocating doing that to poor little froggies.
No.
So I
love frogs.
Oh, yeah. Frogs are great. So why would you ever want to do that to them? Hopefully people just know that because, not because they've tried it before, but because they're like, well, frogs are cold-blooded. So, their body temperatures adjust to whatever the temperature around them is.
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, I digress.
As do I. So
good stuff. So let's a couple of interesting things just I wanted to bring out about like those different versions that we talked about. So like Tolkien went through those different iterations of the Lord of the Rings of A Long Expected Party. Yep. Doing the iteration thing here. So in version 1, Bilbo gives a party, and he's 70 years old, so not 111, but 70 years old. In version 2, he gives a party, and he's 71 years old. All right, so 1 year older.
Pretty similar.
And there's some differences in the text. Version 3, Bilbo is married.
Oh.
Bilbo is married,
Twist.
and he disappears from Hobbit with his wife, Primula Brandybuck, when he's 111 years old.
Okay.
In version 4, Bilbo is again unmarried, and he adopts his younger cousin, Bingo Bolger, son of Primula Brandybuck, changes his name to Bingo Bolger Baggins, and Bilbo disappears from Hobbiton at 111 years old.
You mean Blingo?
No, Bilbo disappears from Hobbiton at 111.
Wait,
and then
Bingo.
Bingo gives the party age 72. Right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, his cousin is Bingo.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Bilbo
okay.
has already disappeared when the party happens. Bingo gives a party for Bilbo, but Bilbo has already left. At
Gotcha.
that point, right.
So basically, Frodo is Bingo. In
Yes.
this version.
Frodo for a long time through the text was named Bingo.
I don't understand that.
Tolkien didn't like it, but he at some point he was kind of it very nearly came to Frodo being Bingo, for all time, because
Was the whole like bingo song not a thing in the UK?
That's a good question. I don't know.
His name?
That is a really, really great question, and something
Because
I did not
bingo,
look up.
like to me, and I feel like to a lot of Americans, is like a dog.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, we all think of bingo, or we think of the game bingo, right?
Yeah,
So you think of either the song about the Bingo the dog, or you think about the game bingo, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not. I think it had something to do with like. So here we go. It is believed that the original use of the name for the character that would become Frodo was inspired by a family of toy koala bears of the Tolkien children called the Bingos.
Oh.
So I'm not sure
okay.
whether it would have been a thing
Interesting.
back then.
Okay.
We'd probably have to go into Wikipedia for that. I want to make sure we don't, we kind of, you know what? This is Do Not Be Hasty. We're going to look it up. So here we go.
Are you going to look up Bingo as his name-o?
I'm going to just look up Bingo.
Bingo?
And kind of see if we can find any, what we can find historically about it.
Okay. Well, the game.
Let's see. Bingo, let's see.
There is a British version of Bingo, it says.
Bingo. Yeah, so the British version, it's a card game. Oh no, it sounds like it's somewhat similar to the one we play.
I think it is.
Now, it says it goes back to the 16th century in Italy.
Oh,
so,
okay.
But as far, I think the thing for me would be the song.
The song,
right?
I agree.
So let's see here. An English children's folk song about a dog. Yeah, so apparently it was an English folk song.
English meaning like...
Yeah, first published in 1780. So Tolkien probably would have known about this song.
He probably would have known about it. Okay.
Yeah, Tolkien probably would have known about this song.
Okay.
Which again makes you further question, it's like, whoa,
yeah.
close call, because Bingo just doesn't like Frodo it's just a way better name than Bingo for this character,
Yeah, for sure.
I can't imagine this character being named Bingo.
No, I feel like I picture him as like a bumbling idiot.
Yeah,
like with the name of Bingo. Like I just don't know.
I pity those who live in the the alternate universe where Tolkien didn't make that change.
Yeah.
I question whether the book would have even become the classic that it is without Frodo. But
that's a great question.
Close call.
Yeah.
Close call. He kept it for a long time, even when he was like, I want to change to Frodo, but I feel like I'm just already like invested in Bingo. But fortunately, he did change it.
All right.
So yeah, the ring did not come into play, as I mentioned before, until much later on. Originally, the plot seems to have consisted in Bilbo needing to be cured of some kind of spiritual illness. Around the third version, Tolkien introduced the ring. So let's look at what was said about that here. The magic ring was the one obvious thing in The Hobbit that could be connected with my mythology. This is Tolkien speaking, J.R.R. Tolkien. To be the burden of a large story, it had to be of supreme importance. I then linked it with the originally quite casual reference to the necromancer, whose function was hardly more than to provide a reason for Gandalf going away and leaving Bilbo and the dwarves to fend for themselves, which was necessary for the tale. From the Hobbit are also derived the matter of the dwarves, Durin their prime ancestor and Moria, and Elrond. The passage in Chapter 3 relating him to the half-elven of the mythology was a fortunate accident, due to the difficulty of constantly inventing good names for new characters. I gave him the name Elrond casually, but as this came from the mythology, Elros and Elrond, the two sons of Eärendil, I made him half-elven. Only in the Lord was he identified with the son of Eärendil, and so the great-grandson of Luthien and Beren, a great power and a ring-holder. Tolkien was able to kind of draw in this world because there'd been a precedent set within the Hobbit when the party of Bilbo and the dwarves and Gandalf reach Rivendell.
Okay.
So that's how they were drawn. That's how the matter of these ancient matters of like Elrond and his heritage and then eventually the ring with Gollum are drawn into the story.
Interesting.
Yep. He comes back to the chapter later and further develops into something more resembling what we are familiar with today. So that's kind of a little bit of background on A Long Expected Party and the composition of it. Again, very convoluted sort of history of it, but hopefully that helps people kind of get grounded a little bit on how it developed over time.
Yeah.
How much Tolkien really wrestled with it, over time to get it in just the form it was, as we read it. All right, well, the next big question, and this was interesting. I thought we were going to end up speculating on this, but it turns out there's an answer, and it's actually in Return of the Shadow. Who were the three dwarves that Tolkien goes off, or I'm sorry, Bilbo goes off and leaves for Rivendell with, right? You remember this in the,
I do.
In A Long Expected Party.
Yep.
He heads off journeys with these three dwarves, and they remain nameless, right? So we actually find it in Return of the Shadow. On page 238 from the Return of the Shadow, we find out their names are Nar, Anar, and Hanar. Now, I thought we were going to I was going to go through and look at the different names of Thorin and company from The Hobbit and determine, could we figure out who these three dwarves may have been, right, from that list, kind of by process of elimination. But he lays it out for us right there in Return of the Shadow. Now, of course, this was not the published final version, but this kind of gives us the idea that Tolkien had names for these dwarves. These are not dwarves that had existed before in The Hobbit. These are not dwarves that were known to us. And there was actually a fourth dwarf, Lofar. Lofar was the fourth dwarf in the story.
Where did you find this? What version?
So this was in the Return of the Shadow. Let me see if I can jump ahead to this page.
Because it mentions bingo in this. It says, please make sure that bingo gets the letter on the dining room.
Because this is Bilbo talking to Lofar, who is the fourth dwarf who's staying behind.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so this is obviously a version where he hasn't changed Bingo's name to Frodo yet.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And let me show you this in context here. Do I have it highlighted? I may not.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, that's the answer there. Those are the names of our three dwarves.
And they all have Nar in their name.
Anar and Hanar. Well, they actually, just like the names of the dwarves in Thorin's company and The Hobbit, they all come from the Old Norse Elder Edda, right? Which is an ancient. This is kind of I'll just read this from the Wikipedia page here. This is the Poetic Edda is the modern name for an untitled collection of Old Norse anonymous narrative poems in alliterative verse. It is distinct from the closer related Prose Edda, although both works are seminal to the study of Old Norse poetry. Several versions of the Poetic Edda exist. Especially notable is the medieval Icelandic manuscript Codex Regius, which contains 31 poems. And so that's where Tolkien got the names for all of his dwarves.
So it's from a Norse poem.
Old Norse.
Old Norse poem.
Very old, yes.
Okay.
So there you go.
Well, that seems to fit with what we know about Tolkien.
Yeah. So when you read this when you read A Long Expected Party from now on, then you know then you know to think of these dwarves as Nar, Anar, and Hanar.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Boom.
Very good. Very good.
All right. One of the other outtakes from The Return of the Shadow is the full text of Bilbo's will. So I thought it would be fun to read this.
Okay.
All right. This is how the will ran. Bilbo, son of Bungo, son of Mungo, son of Inigo, Baggins, hereinafter called the Testator, now departing, being the rightful owner of all properties and goods hereinafter named, hereby devises, makes over, and bequeaths the property and messuage or dwelling hole known as Bag End Underhill, near Hobbiton, with all lands thereto belonging and annexed to his cousin, and adopted heir Bingo, son of Drogo, son of Togo, son of Bingo, son of Inigo, Baggins, hereinafter called the heir, for him to have hold, possess, occupy, let on, lease, sell, or otherwise dispose of at his pleasure, as from midnight of the 22nd day of September in the 111th or 111st year of the aforesaid Bilbo Baggins. I think that was all one sentence.
I think that was.
Moreover, the aforesaid testator devises and bequeaths to the aforesaid heir all monies in gold, silver, copper, brass, or tin, and all trinkets, armors, weapons, uncoined metals, gems, jewels, or precious stones, and all furniture, appurtenances, goods, perishable or imperishable, and chattels, movable and immovable, belonging to the testator, and after his departure, found housed, kept, stored, or secreted in any part of the said whole and residence of Bag End, or of the lands thereto annexed, save only such goods or movable chattels as are contained in the subjoined schedule, which are selected and directed as parting gifts to the friends of the testator, in which the heir shall dispatch, deliver, or hand over according to his convenience. The testator hereby relinquishes all rights or claims to all these properties, lands, monies, goods, or chattels, and wishes all his friends farewell. Signed, Bilbo Baggins. And the context of this is that Otho Sackville Baggins, who was a lawyer, read this document carefully and snorted. Because it was correct, and he was hoping that Bilbo hadn't left a goodwill behind. And
so there's no loophole.
Yeah, and Otho's wife Lobelia says, "Foiled again" to this, right? So this was excised from the final text, but it is given as a footnote in Return of the Shadow, the whole text there of that. So it still even though I don't know that it's meant to feel comical, it still feels a little comical to me. So I thought it was a little bit of a fun read.
I agree. I think you did very well with that. It was, it sounded very like intelligent and like appropriately legal, but still like funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Who knew legal documents could be such funny things? All right. Okay. The next matter I wanted to touch on is so. We have the road goes ever on, right? So the poem "The Road Goes Ever On," the first instance of it in The Lord of the Rings was in this chapter. Many of you might not realize that Tolkien actually commissioned or at least approved a melodic a version, like a musical version of this poem while he was still alive, and it was done by the composer Donald Swann. So I thought it'd be fun because I've always kind of wondered, like, how would this have sounded? What do I prefer? There's the melody from Jackson's film that I for me, it's the one that just sounds like it so much. And with all due respect to Tolkien, like, it just sounds like I just love that version of the song, right? So I wanted to hear how Tolkien heard it himself, right? So I forgot to open this YouTube link, so hopefully it'll probably give us a commercial. I'm gonna try to block this before.
Hello.
Yeah, it's gonna give us a commercial. So let me mute that while we get past the commercial. All right, and we'll skip it. And here we go. You might not hear it very well. From the door where it be, the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can. So that's the melody that Tolkien approved for The Road Goes Ever On. In the animated Hobbit film, there's another version of this. It's a little bit folksier. So let's.
Roads go ever, ever on.
Now it's striking me that you all might not be able to hear this particularly well. So my apologies for that, because it's probably kind of very strong background music.
Sun has shone.
So that's the version from The Hobbit, and then here is the version from the Jackson films.
Down from the door where it began.
Yeah, I love that version. You know, like, to me that just fits extremely well, right? The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. That's the melody I hear when I listen to this song. But I did at least think it was interesting that Tolkien heard a version and approved it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it doesn't sound anything like what I might have had as a walking song. Maybe it's because the piano is so prominent in it. It's a little bit, the piano might be a little bit distracting. It's not a bad melody. I don't hate it or anything like that. But
yeah.
It's just not the one I necessarily hear. But, credit to a professional composer and Howard Shore, right, for the Jackson films, the melody in the Jackson films, because I guess that's why he's a professional composer.
Absolutely.
Making, for multi-million-dollar films. So, did you have a favorite of those, Greta?
Oh no, I really like the robustness of the Donald Swan one. Like, it feels very like,
yeah,
it just feels like we're on an adventure, kind of, to me.
I gotcha.
Pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way.
Yeah, I think the performance to me doesn't sound like it's something you're singing on a walk.
Yeah. It's very operatic.
It's kind of operatic, yeah. But maybe if they kind of rearranged it to be a little more.
Yeah, I like the melody. I like the piano, the piano part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you are a piano player.
I'm a piano player.
Yeah,
so it makes
you
sense.
love playing the piano, so I get it.
Yeah.
Right
but
on.
I do think that I will say my least favorite was definitely the one from the animated film.
Yeah.
That one.
It's very very like 70s, very 70s folk.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just sounds a little bit outdated. It's all right. I mean, it's I don't hate it or anything like that. It's just it sounds a little bit outdated. But my vote would be with the Jacksonville. What do you think of those three, right? I'll try to remember to post the links in this episode on the YouTube page so you can check out fuller, longer versions of them. So if y'all want to vote on that, right? Or just drop a comment, let me know what your favorite version is. If there's another version out there that you really like done by a third party, you drop that in the links as well.
Yeah.
So drop that in the comments. All right. Hey, what's with the Sackville Bagginses? So we've talked about the Sackville Bagginses a little bit. And, they'll come up again, obviously, but I just kind of want to cover their story and why they seem to be out to get all of Bilbo's stuff. And we covered this a little bit, but just let's be clear about it. So, the Sackville Bagginses were descendants of Mungo Baggins, like Bilbo. They considered themselves the heir of the Baggins family headship because Frodo Baggins was the descendant of Largo Baggins, Mungo's younger brother. So, essentially, the whole argument here can be summarized in what you see on the Tolkien Gateway with the genealogy here. Mungo was the father of Bungo, Belba, Longo, Linda, and Bingo. Okay? And then Bilbo is the child of Bungo, right? Bungo being the oldest child and the oldest son, right? So, the inheritance would pass through the line of the eldest, at least the eldest and probably the eldest son of which he was both, which Bungo was both. So Bilbo being the one who inherits Bag End. And then Mungo, or Longo would be the next brother, right? Would be the next son. So he's second oldest. And then his son was Otho, right? Longo Baggins married Camelia, not Carmelia, Camellia Sackville, and that led to the Sackville Baggins family name. And then Otho Sackville Baggins, of course, is the one who gives Frodo a hard time, and then his wife Lobelia are the ones that give Frodo a hard time in A Long Expected Party. So essentially, they were not happy. They thought that since Bilbo was leaving and he didn't have any direct descendants, that the inheritance of Bag End would pass to them. But Bilbo chose to leave it to Frodo instead.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So that's where their ire comes from. I think we talked a little bit about the Sackville family themselves, so we won't go too much into that. But that's the story of why the Sackville Bagginses seem to have it out for Bilbo and Frodo. All right. And then a couple of final things. So Shire Reckoning. Whenever we talk about the Shire Reckoning in terms of time, usually I'm going to render times in terms of the Third Age. Okay. The Third Age, Bilbo's birthday party takes place in the year 3001 of the Third Age. And it's very easy, actually, to get to the Shire Reckoning. You just subtract 1600 years. Okay. So in that case, 3001 of the Third Age, being Bilbo's 111th birthday party. In terms of the Shire Reckoning, it took place in the year
0.
No, 1401. 1401, right? So 3001 minus 1600.
Well, that was a trick question. Sorry.
Yeah, it gives you 1401. No, the Shire, yeah. So just subtract 1600 years if you want to get to the Shire Reckoning. And then the last thing is a response to a question from one of our patrons. This is Richard BW. Richard asks, can you discuss differences between the various Hammond and Skoll companions and guides? Of course, we're using primarily the Reader's Companion from Hammond and Skoll, Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion, which is where we get a lot of our interesting notes from. But there's several other books that this scholarly dynamic duo have produced for Tolkien fans. So let's take a look at some of those. So here's a list of the works that they worked on together, beginning with J.R.R. Tolkien, artist and illustrator, from 1995. There's really 3 different books when it comes to Tolkien as an artist and an illustrator that they've worked on together. The first being the one from 1995. And then there's also The Art of the Hobbit and The Art of the Lord of the Rings. The first one, artist and illustrator, kind of is, kind of a general guide to Tolkien in terms of his artistic visual output. And then, of course, The Art of the Hobbit and The Art of the Lord of the Rings go a lot further into detail about those specific books and the art he produced for those. So those are the 3 artistic kind of visual guides that they produced. They've also done scholarly works on Farmer Giles of Ham, and The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And then you see there the Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion. They also did a volume on Roverandom. The J.R.R. Tolkien Companion and Guide. This is one I actually do not have, but this apparently is really very detailed on Tolkien's biography and is kind of focused on that. So it's not so much a guide to anything with regard to Middle Earth in terms of like within the Legendarium. It's more of like a guide to the whole scope of Tolkien's life. So almost think of it as like a Tolkien biographical encyclopedia. Okay. That's what I gather from the the description of it here on Tolkien Gateway.
The Roverandom one, is that just the story? Like, it's just kind of, is it their version or their edit? Like,
I assume it contains kind of some scholarly notes and that kind of thing. I don't know that it's like very dense. It might just be primarily the story.
Gotcha.
But I with a lot of these things, there's usually some like kind of scholarly notes, maybe a foreword or something like that. Yeah, some annotations included.
Okay.
And then And then there's also, and I have never heard of this actually until now. Lord of the Rings, 1954 to 2004, scholarship in honor of Richard E. Blackwelder, who apparently was a Tolkien scholar. Yeah, so that's kind of an overview of what Hammond and Skoll have produced together. There's lots of scholarly articles here that are linked to as well. So, if you're interested in more of their work, I'd say go to Tolkien Gateway. Probably the best way to get to it is to kind of go to Tolkien Gateway and just look up Christina Skoll or Wayne Hammond, and it'll tell you more about them and about all of their output concerning Tolkien and Middle-earth. So
Good deal.
Yep.
Very good.
All right. Well, Greta.
Yes.
Any questions about any of these Mathoms?
Ooh.
You fathom what a Mathom is now?
I do. I have been educated, and I'm now able to fathom what a Mathom is.
Nice.
And I feel very enlightened. So thank you for that. I hope
You're quite welcome.
I hope our listeners and watchers do as well.
I hope they do as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Indeed. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this inaugural Mathoms episode. We'll have many more coming your way as we continue down this epic journey. What did we miss? Let us know in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one or all of the following ways. Greta?
First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out. It helps us to keep on evering on,
That's right.
and it also helps us get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. Circle. Did you see the circle?
Yes. Boom.
Yes.
Nailed it.
Got it.
Nailed it. All intentional.
Indeed. And for sure. Yep.
Darn Garshnart. That was good. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow, and at some point, mailbag episode next time. With Don't Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. We can't promise you that it will be read on air, but we'll do our best, and some correspondence most certainly will. I will tell you the best ways to get it are generally through YouTube comments or through our Patreon. So either one of those is, we're kind of pulling a lot of our stuff from there for our mailbag episode. Not the only way. You can always send us a email at tolkienroadpodcast@gmail.com. And a couple of those will usually make it into the mix as well.
All right. And don't forget to stop by TrueMythsPress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, Two Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books. Once again, that's TrueMythsPress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase.
All right. To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R.,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Melkor 27,
SaberSystems,
Jeremy D,
Emilio P,
Jonathan D,
Richard K,
Paul D,
Julia,
Werty,
Chris B,
Tuor 91,
Carolyn S,
Emiel K,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R,
Matthew W,
Daniel D,
Harrison C,
Jason C,
Seb M,
Willbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T,
Redhawk,
Shannon S,
Brian O. I,
Zeke F,
James L,
Chris L,
Asya V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
and Eric B. Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye, everybody.